Welcome to Veterans Hour. I'm your host, Zahid Chowdhury. Veterans Challenge Islamophobia is an initiative of the Veterans for Peace National. Veterans for Peace is encouraging all chapters to raise their voices and join us in declaring hashtag No Muslim Ban Ever. They have a website, veteranschallengeislamophobia.org. We all know the Veterans for Peace national website is veteransforpeace.org. We're launching a three-part series on a topic that's often misunderstood, but it's a hot topic in our country today: women and Islam. Our three-part series will involve a session today on the empowerment of women through Islam. The next session will be a panel of American Muslim women sharing their personal stories and experiences. And finally, a third session featuring an interfaith panel of female faith leaders speaking about women's rights through the Abrahamic faith traditions. For today's session on the empowerment of women through Islam, we have a very empowered Muslim woman. I'm pleased to introduce Anila Afzali, who is the Executive Director of the American Muslims Empowerment Network, or AMEN, at the Muslim Association of Puget Sound. Anila is also on the governing board of Faith Action Network and on the steering committee of the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. Anila is an attorney and graduate of Harvard Law School who made partner at law firm and led as general counsel of a local healthcare IT company. Washington Law and Politics recognized her as a rising star multiple years, and she received an Excellence in Diversity Award from the Washington State Bar Association. But 5 years ago, Anila left her successful legal career behind in order to pursue service and knowledge. Since then, she has served as a community activist, interfaith leader, and justice advocate who works on building bridges of understanding and unity. Anila has been recognized for her impactful work through being selected by Seattle Magazine as one of the 2017 most influential people in Seattle. The Faith Action Network also awarded MAPS the Interfaith Leadership Award because of Anila's leadership. I also personally know Anila, and I'm excited to have her join us and lead this program on women and Islam. So welcome to Anila. I will let her take it from here.
Thank you so much, dear brother Zahid, for that kind introduction. It is an honor to be here at Thurston County again with Veterans for Peace, with Veterans Challenging Islamophobia, with our guests who are watching here in Thurston County and across the state, or even perhaps across the nation. And I have to say that I am so excited to be here, being able to talk about one of the topics, one of my favorite topics, which is the empowerment of women through Islam. And you're right, Zahid, that unfortunately there's so much misinformation about this topic specifically, about what Islam teaches with respect to women. So I always appreciate the opportunity to be able to share a different perspective than what most people hear regularly, sort of all day, every day, through mainstream media, Hollywood, and otherwise. And I want to start with a disclaimer for everybody that I am not a scholar, and I do not claim to be, but I love talking about women in Islam because women's rights has always been a passionate, personal topic of interest for me. I grew up in a family with 3 sisters and 2 brothers, so there were lots of women in my family. I considered myself a feminist early on and would challenge cultural or other norms that seem to apply double standards between men and women. And one of the reasons that I myself chose Islam as my religion is specifically because of the liberation and empowerment of women. And if that shocks any of our watchers, any of our viewers, I hope that by the time we are done with this talk today, they'll understand why I say that. And just to share a little bit of background with everybody watching about my own personal story, I will say that I was the first in my family. I was very lucky to be able to go to college, graduate from college, get my degree, continue on to Harvard Law School and get my law degree, fulfilling the commandment that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught us, that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught us about seeking knowledge and the importance of seeking knowledge for both men and women. So I was able to get my law degree, and then I worked at 2 different law firms, making partner at one, before one of my clients hired me in-house as general counsel to lead their legal department. Now, while I was there, I had, as you recognized, a spiritual transformation, and I decided that I really need to spend some time pursuing something very different, something that Islam commands us to do, which is to pursue knowledge, to pursue service, and helping, benefiting mankind. So I actually left my legal career and started working, doing some of the work, the bridge building work, and other work that I'm very, very lucky and blessed to be able to do now. Now, in terms of my faith, I was born and raised Muslim. And I was taught Islamic values like the importance of education and good character. And my mom, she was a devout and practicing Muslim, but my dad, he wasn't quite there. He was more of what we call a Ramadan Muslim, right? I know you're familiar with this, and some of our Christian sisters and brothers may be familiar with Easter Christians or Christmas Christians. So similar concept to that. Now, I personally chose Islam as my religion after studying it on my own in high school, and then doing a comparative religions class and analysis in college. And in college, I was a strong advocate for justice, and I even worked at the Women's Center as a diversity coordinator there at the Women's Center, where I was able to advocate for women's rights and also address the intersection of race and gender and religion. So I understood women's liberation and empowerment. And after my comparative religions analysis, and after looking at world religions, I personally chose Islam as my religion, in large part because of what I considered its empowerment of women, especially comparatively speaking. Now, while I chose Islam at that time, I say with my mind, faith had not yet really moved my heart. Right? So because of that, I continued being a Ramadan Muslim. I continued reserving worship of God for the month of Ramadan. And outside of then, I often thanked God in words, and I prayed when I wanted or needed something. But in my actions, I slowly took step away from God's guidance in college, in law school, and up the corporate ladder, even though I was getting sort of a lot of blessings. I believe I was getting blessings from God. But I reached a point where that reality of my ingratitude, not in my words, because I would often say, thank God, but in my actions, it actually really hit me, including my negligence of not even having finished reading the Quran cover to cover. So I finally, one Ramadan, did read the Quran cover to cover, and that was 6 years ago. And when I did, it shook me to my core. And that's what forced me into this spiritual transformation and even led me to take this leap of faith, to leave my successful legal career and really pursue knowledge and service, the 2 things that Islam really emphasizes strongly, as I know that you know. And part of that pursuit of knowledge has actually allowed me to have even more appreciation of women's empowerment in Islam. And that's why I'm so thankful and glad that Veterans Challenging Islamophobia is doing this 3-part series to help our fellow Americans better understand what Islam actually teaches about women's rights, about women's empowerment, because especially at this time, it is more important than ever for us to understand our Muslim neighbors, for us to understand Islam a little bit better, because there's an entire industry that is promoting a very negative perspective, that is promoting misinformation and conspiracy theories, and we see one of their areas of attack oftentimes is women's issues. So this is why I always love talking about this topic, and I have to say that I personally find a lot of empowerment in Islam. And my own conduct and character, it has changed and improved with Islam and my journey of faith. And I've seen that also in my own family, particularly my siblings and my brothers and my father in particular, the men in my family. Their conduct, their behavior, their treatment of women, their attitudes toward women have significantly changed with them sort of coming back to the faith and pursuing the faith and actually practicing what the faith teaches. So and I see this with my brother, for instance. Now, my brother, I don't know if you know, but he actually was an atheist for much of his adult life. And then when he came back to the faith, I saw the transformation in his attitude and his treatment of women in particular. And it's been this beautiful transformation that I've been able to witness. So that alone is a beautiful example to me of how Islam empowers women and actually uplifts and elevates the status and respect for women. And because of that, because of the personal experience that I've had, because of the experience my family has had, it bothers me so much when I see what's happening with the Islamophobia industry, with the misogyny that exists around us, with sort of the misinformation that's out there, and this dangerous and growing anti-Muslim sentiment that is out there in our country and beyond. And as I mentioned, there's this industry that profits off of it, that spends millions of dollars and promotes this false narrative, this narrative of fear and divisiveness about Islam and women's issues, as I said, in particular. And we also have, as I know you know, we have men in Muslim majority countries, or men who identify themselves as Muslim, who do hold sexist or misogynistic views, unfortunately. The reality is that when they identify themselves as Muslim, people unfortunately associate that with the religion, even though we know that there are men who are sexist, misogynist, patriarchal in all faith traditions, and even among the non-religious, right? So we see this happening. And what I really want to do today is with our guests who are watching us, I really want to give a different perspective, right? Different from the one of negative stereotypes and misinformation that people hear all day, every day. And I'm sure that they hear that repeated in mainstream media, in Hollywood, entertainment, talk shows, radio shows, all of that. So what I want to do is really give that different perspective. So let's talk about women's empowerment in Islam, right?
Absolutely. I mean, our general audience is general public, but our main audience is veterans.
Yes.
So we would like to bring that perspective in the veteran community and our general audience also.
Yes, and certainly to have, particularly the veterans who are involved in this great initiative of Veterans Challenging Islamophobia, to help them understand a little bit of a different perspective on women's issues, particularly when they see from the Islamophobia industry a very different narrative.
From a woman. Also.
There you go. Yes, that is
so
true.
Who speaks for Islam? You know, when we go to a certain spirituality or religion or anybody in that certain demographics, it should be that demographic speaking or somebody else for them.
Yes.
So that's why Veterans for Peace nationally is encouraging our local chapters to produce content from folks which are in their neighborhoods to, you know, raise those voices, because the hashtag is No Muslim Ban Ever.
Yes, and I love that they're doing that kind of initiative. And I wish that others would also take up that kind of call to action and also hold events and efforts and campaigns like Veterans for Peace is doing to be able to help educate each other and help us achieve what we all want, you know, achieve the peace and justice that we are pursuing. So this is a fabulous program, and again, I'm so honored to be here. And when we talk about women's empowerment in Islam, I have to point out 2 points beforehand, right? That the first thing is that what you see happening in some Muslim majority countries or by some individual Muslims is not that necessarily the same thing as what Islam actually teaches. That's important point number 1. And point number 2, there is so much diversity in the worldwide Muslim population, right? There are almost 50 Muslim majority countries in the world, and about 80 countries where Muslims make up a sizable minority of 10% or more. So you cannot talk about Muslims as a monolith, as you often see happening in the world. And also to understand the situation of Islam and women, it's important to recognize what was happening before the introduction of Islam. During pre-Islamic Arabia, for instance, female infanticide, it was commonplace, unfortunately, killing baby girls. This was common, and with the exception of a tiny minority of wealthy women, aristocratic women, the overwhelming majority of women, unfortunately, in 7th century Arabia, they didn't have a lot of rights. They were often treated like property, just like in other parts of the world at the time. And Islam came and it was introduced and it revolutionized the treatment of women at that time, with this package of women's rights that was unheard of and unbelievable at that time for Arabia, and for many centuries thereafter in other parts of the world even. The Quran banned female infanticide, for instance, and promoted the sanctity of life in general, men and women, boys and girls, and it uplifted sort of female value of life and dignity. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, even described the birth of a girl, not a boy, described the birth of a girl as a blessing.
Yep.
Right? And the reality is he didn't need to say that about the birth of a boy because people already recognized and appreciated the birth of a boy as a blessing. But unfortunately, girls were not given that same kind of treatment. And that's why he elevated the status by talking about girls as a blessing. Islam granted women the right to own property, the right to enter into contracts on their own as an individual, including the marital contract to which they had to agree, the right to divorce, the right to child custody, the right to education, the right to participate in public affairs, and so much more. And prior to Islam, the dowry that was given, that a man gave to a woman upon marrying, it went to the girl's father, to the bride's father, right? Because it was a contract between the two men. Exactly, yes. And the Quran changed that, declaring that women first off needed to consent to the marital contract, and that the dowry, it belonged to the woman, right? It went directly to her, not to the father, as had happened before. We also had the issue of inheritance. After a man passed away, his brother or brothers would inherit his wives in the past, before Islam. And Islam came and abolished that practice of compulsory inheritance of the women, of the wives, and specifically said that that is not allowed. The Quran also extended inheritance rights to women, which was not necessarily the case beforehand.
It was revolutionary at that time, and in the culture and in the regions and prevailing customs and cultures all over the world at that time.
Exactly. Yep. And what we also had is, when you look at the Quran, some people will look at verses of the Quran, like specifically about this issue of inheritance. You may have heard people say this, right? And they'll claim that, women get half of what a man gets. And they find that as reflective of, their perhaps negative view of Islam. But what they don't understand is a deeper context. And if you can understand the deeper context in which some of these verses exist, you have a better appreciation for them. So for instance, it's true that generally speaking, the Quran, not in all cases, but generally, it prescribes double the inheritance for a man as a woman. But the reality also is that the Quran places financial responsibility on the man, not on the woman, right? So any money that I make is mine.
It's yours to keep.
It's mine to keep and mine alone. I don't have to spend on the family. I don't have to share it with anyone unless I want to. So my money is my money, but his money, whether he is my father, husband, brother, uncle, whoever it may be, his money is our money, right? And if you look at it from that perspective, you understand that it's not actually unfair, because at the end of the day, I benefit more because I can hold on to all my money myself, do as I please, and of course, any money that I contribute to the family is considered charity on my part, and I get rewarded for that. Whereas for a man, the money he gets through inheritance or otherwise has to be spent. Yes, it's obligatory to be spent on the family. So if you look at it that way, I'm not hurt by half inheritance. And Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was active in helping around the house, even doing sort of what many considered women's work at the time and even today.
Household chores.
Exactly, household chores, And in fact, this is surprising. A lot of people don't know this. I myself was very interested to learn about this, but that in Islam, a woman is actually not required to do housework. She's rewarded if she does it, and she's encouraged, just like a man is, to work together and make a good, fair balance in a marital relationship, but there's no actual obligation on her. And there's this wonderful story.
Which was very opposite of the culturally understanding at that time. It was revolutionary.
Yes, exactly. And there's this great story about Umar al-Khattab, may God be pleased with him, who was one of the second leader of the Muslim community after Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, passed away. So this man one day came up, and he came to complain to Umar al-Khattab, came to complain to Umar about his wife. Right? He was going to complain, and when he gets to Umar's house, he hears Umar's wife, nagging him, right? So this man, as he's waiting, he hears his Omar's wife scolding him, and Omar was quiet the whole time, not answering back. So this man, he turns around, he's like, oh, I can't complain to this guy. He's got his own, he's dealing with the same problem. So this guy starts walking away when Omar comes out and sees him, says, what is it you wanted? And this man says, oh, leader of the believers, I came to complain to you about my wife's bad temper and how she nags me. Then I heard your wife doing the same to you, right? This is what he said. And Omar replied, oh, my brother, I bear with her because of her rights over me.
Yep.
She cooks my food, bakes my bread, washes my clothes, breastfeeds my child, and yet none of these are her duty. And then she is a comfort to my heart and keeps me away from forbidden deeds. Consequently, I bear with her. And Omar told the man to be patient with his wife as well, right? This kind of story, it's profound because you never hear these kinds of stories when people talk about Islam and women's rights. And Muhammad, peace be upon him, he himself, you know this story, he married Khadija, may God be pleased with her, who was at that time, one of the minority of wealthy, sort of aristocratic women. And he was 25 years old.
She was 40.
Exactly. She was 15 years his elder. She had actually been divorced, widowed, had children.
Yep.
She proposed to him,
Yep.
right?
Not the other way around.
Yes, exactly. She had actually been married 3 times beforehand. And the marriage that they had, it was a monogamous, beautiful relationship of love and respect. And they were together for 25 years until she passed away in that monogamous relationship. And that love that they had, that they shared, by all accounts, it was really deep. It was really the kind of love relationship, love accounts that anybody sort of would want. It was full of love and affection. And even after she passed away, Muhammad, peace be upon him, he would continue to honor her by giving presents to her friends. Yes, to her friends. And at one time when he was asked to describe, Khadija, he just, out of just emotion, he was just like, she just was. Like he couldn't even get himself to say anymore because of the amount of emotion and love and respect and affection that he had for her. And that's the kind of treatment that the Quran talks about when God even says that the love and affection in a marital relationship in the Quran, that's a reflection of God's mercy. That mercy is what we should strive for in marital relationships. And Islam prescribed the kind treatment of women. And Muhammad, peace be upon him, even specifically taught his followers that the best of you are those who are best to your women, right? And the Quran commands men to live in kindness with women and even recognizes that women have rights similar to the rights of men over them in kindness. And even during a divorce, at a time of marital discord, a man is commanded to treat his wife or his future divorcee, divorced wife with kindness. And you also know that Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, talks specifically about how women are a pathway to paradise. They can be your path, whether it's a mother, where Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said paradise lies at the feet of the mother, right? Or if it's daughters, where Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught the men that if you raise 4 girls well, raise them well and educate them, 4 daughters, not 4 sons, but 4 daughters, that could be your pathway to paradise. And there was this one guy who came up to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and said, what about me? I only have 3 daughters, right?
Dennis has 2.
Dennis has 2. Well, look at that, right? So if a veteran or if somebody else has less than 4 children, what about that? And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, even if you raise those daughters well, and you educate them, again, emphasizing that importance of education, that can be your pathway to paradise. So in the Quran also, we have a chapter that's named after a woman, Mary, peace be upon her, mother of Jesus, peace be upon him. We have a whole chapter named women, right? There's a chapter named women, yes, and we have a chapter named Maryam or Mary. And Mary, peace be upon her, is a role model for not just men, not just women, but also men. This is the kind of teaching that we have in the Quran, in Islam. The creation story is another example, a beautiful example where in the Quran, a little bit different from the Bible, in the Quran, God talks about Adam and Eve having eaten of the tree together. And there's no blame on one party versus the other. They were both at fault. They both sought forgiveness right away, and they both were forgiven by God. And so childbirth or any of the pains of childbirth are not seen as a suffering here on earth. Rather, a mother's pains of childbirth are a way to elevate her status, to make it so, as I mentioned before, paradise lies at her feet, right? So these are the kinds of beautiful teachings that I just read these and I just feel like, wow, there's so much in there, in the Quran, in the tradition. And you know, this is why when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was even asked by someone, who should I show the most respect and kindness to? You know what he said?
I think you said your
mother.
Your mother.
Yep, he said your mother. And he's like, okay, then who? What did he say?
Your wife?
No, he actually said your mother again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then he said, then who?
Third time.
Third time, he said your mother again. Finally, on the fourth time, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, your father. And one scholar one time described how if this were the Olympics, the mother, the woman, would get the gold, silver, and bronze, right? And the man would walk away maybe with a consolation prize.
Yep.
So we have these kinds of teachings and traditions.
Good ways to, bring in the metaphors.
Yes.
To, shed light on it.
Exactly. And to help people just sort of see this because they don't normally hear this perspective, right? So this is just a different perspective, a different side of Islam, of the Quran, of Prophet Muhammad's teachings, peace be upon him. And also what we have emphasized in the Quran is the importance of choice. Religious freedom. God specifically says in the Quran, let there be no compulsion in religion. And that certainly applies to whether or not somebody chooses to be Muslim, but also whether or not they choose to practice, whether or not they choose to pray, whether or not they choose to wear hijab, for instance. And in fact, when we talk about hijab, that's an important one. I get a lot of questions around hijab, right?
In these days?
In these days especially. Hijab, again, is just the head covering that some Muslim women choose to wear. And it is a choice by the woman. I chose to start wearing hijab about almost 3 years ago. My siblings, none of them wear it. I'm the only one in my family among my siblings who wears hijab. And we actually have a video, a little short hijab Q&A video. And this video is a part of the YouTube series called Secret Life of Muslims. And this is a award-winning series of short videos that were created by filmmaker Joshua Seftel. And they use humor, facts, and personal narratives to help people understand their Muslim neighbors. So we'll go ahead and play this very short video on hijab.
The weirdest question I've been asked about hijab is probably if I shower in it. The answer is no.
If I wear it during sex. What does covering your hair have to do with it at that point, You're seeing other parts.
Hijab in Arabic means to cover. It normally refers to
A piece of fabric that some
Women use to cover their hair.
hijab is a concept.
It's meant to kind of promote modesty.
A hijab is a thing that a male Muslim should have absolutely no opinion about.
Not all Muslim women wear hijab.
I've never worn a hijab except when I actually pray.
There are many ways to wear it depending on culture and preference.
There's the just got here from the Middle East hijab.
There's the turban hijab.
I wear my hijab like this.
Sometimes I put a turban up, sometimes I'll just drape it.
Amani's like the Muslim hipster. She just goes out, throws on that hijab, and she's like, I'm Muslim, and what? Mine is the Bluetooth hijab. This is how easy I could be walking around the city with this.
And then mine is
yeah.
There's this Western stereotype that a Muslim woman who wears it did not have the choice to do so. It is seen as a symbol of oppression rather than a symbol of devotion.
The minute that I put it on, I felt like my identity became whole. When I wasn't wearing hijab, I was just some ordinary white girl from New York City. Wearing hijab made you know that I was Muslim.
It's for me a reminder to lead my life with religion first.
For me, putting on a headscarf was emancipation, because that was the moment that I reclaimed my identity.
They say, hey peeps, I'm a Muslim, what's up?
My hijab takes nothing away from my intellect, takes nothing away from my passions and my values and the principles that I hold.
How does it look? Good?
I think it looks great.
Okay, making sure.
So that video helps you see a little bit of a different perspective on hijab, on the head covering. And as I said, I started wearing it just relatively recently, and I'm the only one of my sisters who does wear hijab. And I started actually wearing it not because of a religious mandate. I personally started wearing it because I wanted to stand in solidarity with my Muslim sisters across the US who were facing discrimination or bigotry and unfortunately even hate crimes sometimes. So I wanted to stand in solidarity with them.
Because you had a privilege as a powerful attorney,
Yes.
as a Harvard graduate, as all those. You have privileges.
Yes.
Those other marginalized and disenfranchised poor sisters, what they choose to practice, they do not have that privilege. So it's good to show that, utilize. There's a saying, we all have privilege in some sphere of life.
Yes.
Please don't sit on your privilege.
There
Put
you
it
go.
to good use.
Yes, and I certainly feel privileged. I did have a certain level of privilege, and there are many other women who also have privilege who choose to wear it, and there are some who don't have privilege and still wear it. So yeah, I did it really to stand in solidarity with all the Muslim women out there who are choosing to wear hijab in our country. And I also did it because of pride of identity. Because the more I learned about Islam, honestly, the more I learned about it, the more beauty and peace and just like, I was like, I love this. Why would I not want to self-identify in a very visible and public way as Muslim when I was loving what I was learning about Islam? Not necessarily a sort of different narrative that people hear through like the Islamophobia industry or certain practices of people who call themselves Muslim and do horrible things. That's not the Islam that I was proud of. I was proud of the Islam that I was actually learning about, like these beautiful stories, these beautiful examples, the actual teachings of the faith tradition. That's what I found beautiful. And I was like, you know what? I'm proud to be a Muslim. Why wouldn't I want to identify that way? And I tell people the same way that if you ever see me during football season, I'm a proud Seahawks fan. So you'll see me all decked out in my number 12. I even have a hijab that's a Seahawks hijab. I do. So it's these reasons of pride. And also because when I wear the hijab, when I wear this head covering, it's a constant reminder to me of God. It's a connectedness, and it gives me that extra strength that I need sometimes to remember that God is watching and I'm trying to do good. So to follow some of the mandates, like even repelling evil with good or showing forgiveness and kindness even to the people who do you wrong. So when somebody on the streets makes some comment, which I've had, I've had people, I know you've had that too, where people will make comments, negative comments, people have rolled down their windows, yelled obscenities at me. Wearing this, it's a little reminder to me that it's like, no, I'm not going to react. It gives me that extra, I tell people it's like my, my Wonder Woman cape or something, or tiara. It's my way of,
Good.
yeah.
Changing perspectives.
Exactly. So that's why I started wearing hijab, but I hope that video helped people see a different perspective from other Muslim women who also weigh in on sort of their views on hijab. But this mandate of modesty, because that's really what the commandment is in the Quran, that mandate exists for men and women.
And just for our viewers to understand what is modesty. Modesty in the spiritual realm is understood as not going to any extremes, not being an extremist in understanding and in practice. So that's where the modesty comes from, and that's what the means,
Absolutely. And that if you look at the verse about the one that people identify when they talk about hijab, that verse is actually first addressed to men, right? The Quran first, the verse first addresses men and tells them to lower their gaze and essentially be modest, and then it turns to women. And in fact, one time when there was a beautiful woman in front of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and there was a man there too, a young man, and he was, for lack of a better word, he was ogling her, right? He was staring, just in awe of her beauty, I guess. And, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he didn't tell the woman to get away or go hide or cover herself or anything. Instead, what he did, right? What he did is he didn't even address the woman. He took the man and he turned his face away, kind of like by the chin, moved his face away from the woman, kind of like as an indication, a teaching. Exactly. Like, you shouldn't be doing that. Here's the teaching that he had.
Enough time.
Yes, exactly. And in his final farewell sermon, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he left people with certain words. He specifically told the men, you have certain rights over women, but they have certain rights over you. And women, he said, are your partners and helpers. This is the idea in Islam of like men and women being sort of partners coming together to try to improve each other and do good. right? That's part of the teachings of Islam. And in fact, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was criticized as being too pro-women.
It is called feminist.
Exactly. And the traits and values that he embodied, they are oftentimes, things that we consider feminine traits in sort of modern society.
Yeah, because he was an extremist and he embodied and lived that modesty.
Yes. Modesty, gentleness, mercy, compassion, humility, all of these kinds of traits. Simplicity, yep. And he even described, a strong person in his mind, he described it not as somebody who's like physically fit or strong and can wrestle somebody down, but rather somebody who can restrain their own, restrain themselves, restrain their anger, their emotions. Discipline, yes. Absolutely. And that's why we even have, as you recognize, he was considered a feminist. And we have people, even people who've written articles like this, Muhammad was a feminist kind of article that we'll place up for people as well, right? In this article, Jim Garrison, he wrote, of all the founders of the great religions, Buddhism, Christianity, Confucianism, Islam, and Judaism, Muhammad was easily the most radical and empowering in his treatment of women. Right? You never hear that perspective today. You do? Oh, you do.
But not these days with this cultural innuendos in the Islamophobia industry, of course. And that narrative is missing, especially in our veterans community. It is lacking. So we need to bring that historical perspective and those facts so people can see for things as they are factually.
Exactly. And in veterans in particular, when you talk about the experiences that they've had, some of them have been involved in some of the wars overseas where we have sort of attacked, let's say, Muslim majority countries.
Mostly Muslim majority countries.
Mostly Muslim majority countries. Exactly. So they have been in places where they have seen countries devastated by war, by poverty, by destruction of institutions, and they might see a very different perspective of women's empowerment because the women that they are encountering, the communities that they are encountering, are devastated by warfare. And when you destroy institutions,
generation after generation,
that's true too.
Sometimes so long that the family and the cultural institutions even break down under such a prolonged trauma.
Yeah, exactly. So that is not really the right perspective on sort of what Islam teaches. 1,400 years later, we should look instead throughout the course of history. We should look instead to what the Quran says. We should look instead to the example of Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him. And in fact, because of that revolutionizing impact that Islam had in introducing sort of this package of women's rights, women throughout Islamic history, they have been productive members of society, and we have many examples of just some amazing women in all sectors of society, in the early years of Islam and even sort of throughout history. For example, we had women in the marketplace, right? A lot of people don't know, people like Shafa bint Abdullah, who was actually even appointed as a supervisor or sort of the minister of finance, so to speak, in our terms today, right? We had female scholars. This concept or this, the idea or this principle of female scholars is actually so profound. We today have a loss, and it's really unfortunate that we've lost a lot of the female scholarship that we had in the early generations after Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In fact, there was Dr. Muhammad Akram Nadwi. He was this man who decided that he's going to write a book actually about the various female scholars throughout history, the Muslim female scholars. And he thought there was going to be about 25 to 30 people that he was going to write about. You know what happened? He started writing this, he started researching this. He came across over 8,000 in just his research alone. And he ended up writing a 40-volume book just of Muslim female scholars in history. That just is profound. And these are women who actively participated in society, and not just actively participated, but even helped reform society. They played the role of jurists. They were issuing religious rulings. They were teaching men and women. And we have numerous examples of so many people, including Aisha, may God be pleased with her, one of the most recognized female scholars in world history. And she was the wife of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he even taught his followers to take their religion from her after he passed away. So she, Aisha, taught men and women the religion, and the narration of various hadith, sayings of Prophet Muhammad, and teachings of the faith. And we have so many other examples, including people like Fatima al-Batayayiha, who was an 8th century scholar and known as one of the greatest scholars of her time. And during the annual pilgrimage to Mecca that happened, men and women from all around, they would flock to go see her and study from her and just to hear her speak. This was in 8th century. You know, we had others who taught just so many, numerous, countless men and women. So just the concept, or with the female scholarship, that alone was so empowering, so impactful throughout history. And in fact, this is something a lot of people don't know either. The first university in the world was built by a female Muslim woman. And this was in Morocco. This was Fatima al-Fihri. She had inherited some money and she decided to use it to build a university.
Yeah. Education, knowledge.
Yep.
And building better community.
Yep, exactly. And also at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, women fought on the battlefield with him. He even recognized the courage of various women and their fierceness, like Hawla bin Hakim, who fought several battles, protecting Prophet Muhammad even. In the sciences, we had women who practiced medicine, who performed surgery on women and men. We have sort of in writing and poetry, in so many different parts and segments of society, women played a fundamental role, Muslim women, in contributing actively and continuing sort of what they were commanded to do. And in fact, when we're talking about women's rights and speaking up as an advocate for women's rights, there's one example specifically of Nusayba, who had specifically even questioned Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, about the verses of the Quran. Because as revelation was coming down, she said to him, one day, like, why is God always just talking to the men? She actually questioned. Yeah, it's to mankind, so it includes men and women. But still, she was like, I want to. She challenged that, right? And what happened? God responded, and you had this beautiful verse that I hope we can play. You had this beautiful verse that came down, and this is Quran chapter 33, verse 35.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات والقانتين والقانتات والصادقين والصادقات والصابرين والصابرات والخاشعين والخاشعات والمتصدقين والمتصدقات والصائمين والصائمات والحافظين فروجهم والحافظات والذاكرين الله كثيرا والذاكرات أعد الله لهم مغفرة وأجرا عظيما.
And it says, indeed the Muslim men and Muslim women, the believing men and believing women, the obedient men and obedient women, the truthful men and truthful women, the patient men and patient women, the humble men and humble women, the charitable men and charitable women, the fasting men and fasting women, the men who guard their private parts and the women who do so, and the men who remember Allah often and the women who do so. For them, Allah has prepared forgiveness and a great reward.
Thank you.
Yes, and now I also want to play a spoken word, a powerful spoken word by Kamal Saleh. And this describes some of what I've been talking about, some of sort of the role that women have played historically and the role models that we have throughout Islamic history of female participation and active participation. I personally am a fan of spoken word, and Kamal Saleh is one of my favorites when it comes to Muslim artists. So we could play this video by him called The Greatest Woman.
Something must be wrong when almost every single song has sex as its basis. When rap stars get famous after making lyrics that are shameless. When a woman is expected to sleep with a man who doesn't even know what her name is. And when artists are paid to degrade the very woman that have made them. To the point they are nothing more than pieces of plastic that we can dispose of once they are no longer attractive. It's sickening and sadistic that this world's become so misogynistic. And you can call me unrealistic, but just listen to the statistics. 7 in 10 men view porn, while over 75 million are addicted. 68 million requests a day for pornographic pictures, making 1 in 4 searches sexually related. It's like nobody even knew she existed until she got naked, degraded and abused over and over again just to gain millions of views. It's a shame we've subdued to a definition of beauty which is so misconstrued. As we judge each other's looks off of Facebook likes, Instagram pictures to filter off what we really look like. See, we are so obsessed with our outside, we have slowly lost sight of who we really are in real life. I mean, it's sad to see so many teens lose their self-esteem. Looking at these magazines thinking they have to look like what they see. Please, you are worth much more than a 2D image on a screen. You are a living, breathing human being. If only you knew what you really mean. Just look into your history books and begin to read of all the girls in the world who were capable to achieve, and you will surely see with certainty females like Fatima al-Fihri, who opened the first ever university, Rufayda al-Islamiyya, the first nurse to perform surgery, and Aisha bint Abi Bakr, the greatest female scholar in eternity. It's a shame you probably haven't even heard of these great female prodigies. Honestly, we don't need to give up our modesty in order to be successful. For you are worth much more than a commodity that is sexual. You have so much more potential if only you knew your worth. You could be like the greatest of all women to have walked this earth, like Mary, the mother of Jesus, chosen by Allah to be an example for the believers, a woman who stood strong even when she was abused, falsely accused and ridiculed for things she'd never ever do, so it didn't really matter when there was nobody else beside her, for she knew that God was Ar-Razzaq and her ultimate provider, and she had a trust in Him alone. Just like Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun, a woman who was brave and courageous, stood up for what was right and didn't let anybody change this. A woman who was fearless and laughed in the face of death, for she gave up the riches of this life for a palace in the next. Next up, Khadija, the mother of the believers, a wealthy merchant who had nurtured the Prophet for over 25 years, his first wife, the love of his life, and the mother of his kids. She was the first to believe in him when nobody else ever did. She just is, beyond any words that can make you understand. So much so that even Allah sent her His salam. She was grand, and Allah assured her, just like her daughter, Fatima, the master of all women in paradise, a woman who would shine so bright she was nicknamed as Zahra, the splendid one with the most generous of hearts, a woman who gave up so much of her food she had no choice but to fast. She would fight on behalf of her father even as a little girl. And such are the examples of the greatest woman in the entire world. And it had nothing to do with how they looked, but for who they truly were. So ignore the standard of success defined by society, when God has said that the best of mankind are those who have piety, regardless of your shape, your color, or your race. For God does not look at your bodies, nor does He look at your face. Rather, He looks towards your heart and checks your faith. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the people say or who they think you are, when you could be like the greatest of all women in the eyes of Allah. The greatest woman.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. So that really summarizes what I was talking about a little bit earlier. And even today in sort of modern history, or Muslim women today, when we look at sort of what the role that women play, they have been heads of state. You know, there's about a dozen Muslim women who have been heads of state in Muslim majority countries. We have had female Muslim recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize,
Youngest
right?
also?
Youngest, there you go, yep. The American Muslim women here in our country are the second most highly educated religious community, and there's no educational or wage gap between American Muslim women and American Muslim men. And that's actually very unique for a religious community. But we have that. We have in sports, we have people like Ibtihaj Muhammad now, who brought a medal for Team USA, right? We have others. There's actually a Barbie maid of Ibtihaj Muhammad now with a hijab, the head covering. We have other Muslim women who don't wear head covering, who's also won medals for Team USA, like Dalila Muhammad. In politics and in other segments of society today as well. We have representatives like Ilhan Omar in Minnesota and elsewhere. So whether they wear hijab or not, American Muslim women are lawyers, doctors, activists, participants, nurses, just doing whatever we can, knowing that we're all in this together and doing our part to help contribute to make our communities better.
To make better community, that's why Veterans for Peace National has been trying again and again, asking the local chapters to show the faces
There you
of
go.
Muslim women
There you go.
in their communities.
Yes.
And this is, on the lead of the Veterans for Peace National.
Nice.
The chapters are encouraged
Yes.
to show the faces of the Muslim women in their communities.
Absolutely.
Rather than the few countries which we go, which the soldiers and GIs are going, and they understand that is be all and of all of Muslim culture. Thank you.
And that's important to do, right? And we also have American Muslim veterans who are women. So hopefully they're also getting some some time and opportunity to talk to people, because the more people actually talk to their American Muslim neighbors, including the women, they can get a very different perspective, right? Now, having said all of this, I don't want people to walk away from this thinking that, I think all Muslim, women or all Muslims are good and everything about Islam is great. That's not necessarily the case. We know that there are Muslim women across the world today, certainly, unfortunately, who are not empowered, even though people like me, I find empowerment in Islam. The reality is not all Western women are empowered either, right? Or liberated in any sense.
I remember when I was in the United States Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., and had the world's greatest jurist throughout the history of mankind, womankind, but don't get me wrong. So throughout the history of humanity, and I remember if you look up to the left, the third person on your left is Prophet Muhammad, messenger, peace be upon him.
Yes.
So, but I don't remember in the greatest jurist in American culture, I have seen, not before, 10, 20 years before, that inclusion of both sexes as much.
I see.
For equity or for equality, but it's a good thing that it's moving, and we should continue that.
Yes.
We should always better our communities and our understanding.
Yes.
So yeah.
Absolutely, and getting more inclusion of women voices, particularly in places where they historically have not had that kind of role or played that role. I think it's very, very important. And we're taking positive steps, right, towards doing that. There are some steps back, of course, unfortunately, but we really can work together. And for people who are interested in supporting women's rights, people who share our values of sort of perspective on this, we should work together. And one of the things that really bothers me is when people attack Islam, whether by the Islamophobia industry, whether people who may not understand Islam, when they attack Islam in a way that actually denigrates the religion, when the religion can be used as a tool to actually empower communities. And particularly when you rely on the Quran, for instance, the religious teachings, for instance, in conservative places, in Muslim majority countries, for instance, where there's...
You can utilize that to empower women and bring about a better society and community where the cultures have not been allowing to do so.
Exactly. That can be that tool. So I don't want people to denigrate the religion when that's the tool that can actually liberate and empower women, right? Around the world, here as well, for the people who choose to. And in fact, people are surprised to hear that in the Western world, converts to Islam are 4 to 1 women to men. So women outnumber male converts to Islam. And I think part of it is some of the teachings and some of the traditions that we've been talking about here, right? Now again, I do recognize that there are people who have used religion, who have used Quran, who have used the Bible to advance a different perspective. To oppress women, right?
Totally.
Yeah, and that happens today, that has happened throughout history, and unfortunately that will continue.
How many hundreds of years?
Unfortunately, yes. But as I tell people, that is in spite of the Islamic teachings, not because of, right? And that false attribution of that problem to the religion, to the Quran, to Islam, that's what I find problematic. That's what I think we can really change and challenge together with our veterans, with people who are out there who want to advocate for equality, who want to advocate for our values, our shared American values. The opportunity to do so is there, not denigrating the religion, recognizing that people have used and will continue to manipulate religion for their purpose, not falling victim to the misinformation campaign by the Islamophobia industry, and instead working with groups like Veterans Challenging Islamophobia to challenge that kind of false narrative, to challenge those campaigns, and instead promote a campaign of building bridges of understanding and unity. And I'm so glad that we're doing sort of this program, this 3-part series, and I know in our next one we will get the chance to actually hear the stories of some American Muslim women themselves. But we have a video that people can watch too. This is one instance of an American Muslim woman reclaiming the narrative, because that's part of what needs to happen, is American Muslim women themselves reclaiming their own narrative and telling their own stories. And this one is part of the Secret Life of Muslim series. And this one is Layla Shakely talking about how she's using fashion to reclaim her American Muslim identity.
I idolized Chad Muska as a 13-year-old. I wore the whole getup, with my skater pants and my skater sweaters. I dropped into my first half pipe at 14. It was the most remarkable day in my life. And I was like, guys, I dropped in. I'm a vert skater now. Other people described me as fearless, curious, energetic, probably against the grain. I grew up in a very girl power type of family where my parents had 6 children and my father and mother had the same exact expectations for my sister and I as they did my brothers. While I was a very proud young Muslim American woman, I didn't have role models to point to. Princess Jasmine from Aladdin by Disney, that might have been my only option. The mainstream view is so misrepresentative of so many young Muslim Americans across the nation. They were generally represented in one way, instead of an amalgamation of many identities like myself. I definitely consider myself an artist and a skater girl, somebody in tech, but also a faithful Muslim. Not being willing or able to accept these stereotypes, my friends and I decided to take our favorite parts of ourselves and turn it into a music video. To Jay-Z's Somewhere in America. New blacks with new stacks. I called up my friends and said, hey Hamna, you have a motorcycle, bring it, let's get some footage. Hey Ibtihaj, you're a fencer for Team USA, let's shoot you fencing. You have dope style and you're an attorney, come and look really cool. I happen to really like fashion, so I got really dressed up. I like skateboards as well, so I threw that into the mix. We had no idea that the video would get such a wide reception. I get on my social media and I just have a zillion notifications. The opinions ranged from this doesn't represent me to this is awesome. And we were kind of happy to see the whole this doesn't represent me piece. We're like, yeah, nothing represents you right now, which is why you have to take control of our narrative and make something that represents you, because this sure as hell represents me. And the next thing I knew, I was in the pages of Glamour and Marie Claire, even GQ. At some point, I had a French girl walk up to me and say, you're the girl from the Mipsters video. You guys are a big deal in France. And I'm like, that's cool. Mipsters ended up turning into a huge community of young Muslim Americans across the nation. The most important things and the best things that I saw were the tons of notes from young girls. Like, I used to be so self-conscious about my identity. It's so awesome to know that we have role models that we can look to and are a more accurate representation of who we are. The most unexpected outcome out of this video was probably this. I actually met my husband because he saw the video and decided that he absolutely had to meet me. By the third date, he told me, "I'm gonna marry you." My husband is definitely a Mipster, and we hope to have very Mipster babies one day. I had no idea that those Wednesday afternoons in the skate park would be so critical in shaping the Muslim American narrative that my children will ultimately be raised in.
Thank you for watching the video.
Okay. So if you like this video, hopefully you will join us next week when we will have a panel of different American Muslim women who will also share their own personal stories, and hopefully we'll get a chance to learn a lot from them and from that opportunity. And I will just close by just saying thank you so very much to you, Brother Zahid, to Veterans for Peace, to Veterans Challenging Islamophobia, to Thurston County Media for this opportunity, for this series. This is how we help build bridges of understanding and unity. And again, I appreciate being here, and I look forward to joining everybody next week with our panel of speakers who will share and shed some light on their experience of being American and Muslim.
Thank you so very much to my great audience, and especially veterans.